Hello and welcome to Show Studio. You know the setup by now. We are here to discuss Celine, Michael Ryder's debut for Spring/Summer 2026. And before we get into it, my name is Dal Chodha, and we are just going to introduce you to the rest of the panelists, starting with you, Eilidh.
My name is Eilidh Duffy. I am a writer, editor, and historian.
My name is Benji Park. I'm a consultant and a content creator.
Hi, I'm Nicole Brixi. I'm a creative strategist at Condé Nast Britain.
Hi, my name is Tibble, and I am the owner of La Nausée, and I'm also a model.
Welcome, everyone. And thank you, everyone at Show Studio, for making it very cool in here. Normally, these are quite sweaty affairs, so we're okay for now. They've invested in AC for us and just turned it off, so thank you very much. What I find quite interesting about right now, so it is a Tuesday and the show was on Sunday, and before we went live we were sort of saying that it felt like it was ages ago, and Harry, you mentioned in fashion terms it felt like ages ago, and I think that's quite an interesting place for us to begin thinking about how we respond to something and how obviously everything feels very, very geared towards an immediate response. So I wondered kind of, Harry, what your thoughts were immediately on what you had seen.
Well, my immediate response was I called my friend Zach to get some advice, because I told him I was doing this, and he's a very knowledgeable guy. So we kind of spoke for a couple of hours about the collection. So we kind of went in quite harsh, I think, in the beginning, which then turned out to be quite a positive response, while still thinking about those things we had in our initial response. But yeah, even in those 2 hours, my opinion was changing.
Did Zach win you over, or was it a kind of sense
No, it was like we were both kind of agreeing, and then we were kind of also like challenging each other as well a little bit to see where we were at. See, oh, do you actually think that, or do you think that because like someone else made you think that? You know, those sort of things.
Nicole, I wondered how often that happens to you. Is that a normal occurrence for you to... Because there's something really wonderful about that, like you're dedicating the time to really chew it over, like we are here and like everybody watching us. But I wondered kind of, is that typical in your work and in your career?
I think that happens pretty much every time I watch a show. I don't think that I've ever watched a show and had the same opinion the second time I've watched it. There is so much there you need to decode and so much information you have to consume when you're watching 35 plus looks strutting down the runway. So I think this couldn't be more the case here, because not only it's a lot of looks, it's a co-ed show, but it's also the first of Michael's debut. So it's kind of natural that we're expecting something, because we've seen a different direction for the past 8 years, and then we watch something that's so new to be like, oh, and then be like, wait, hold a second, and then you watch it again, and then you're like, oh, now I have a different perspective. So yeah, I think I echo your sentiment in the sense that the first time I watched it, I had quite a harsh sort of overview. Second time I looked at it a little bit with more kindness.
Okay. Benji, I wanted to come to you as our resident content creator. Is that that's the term?
No, I can't think of anything worse to be called, to be honest.
But we will get to a better term maybe by the end of this session. But how reflective are you in what you make? Because of course the nature of TikTok, for example, and social media is an immediate response. But from your two panelists who already are talking about that first look and that second look, how much does that affect what you say or how you say what you say?
Well, I mean, inherently I'm an academic. My specialty is, it's what I'm doing my PhD in. So as an academic who works outside of fashion and then looks inward on fashion, because my job is anthropology and religious studies, it's always interesting to come to shows or to sit at shows and have that complete outsider perspective, because I go from like holding conferences with like religious leaders and then going to Fashion Week, which is what I was supposed to do for Celine, but I ended up having to miss it because I had to be away hosting a conference. So I came back after Fashion Week, and then tomorrow I leave because I have to go for couture, and saw this show. And I think it's always such an interesting perspective to have a departure from a designer who has such a strong design aesthetic like Hedi Slimane, and then to see someone like Michael Ryder come in who's really cut his teeth previously at, Three Big Houses. We talk about it being his debut for Celine, but really it's his homecoming. He was a designer there for 10 years under Phoebe Philo. It was such a specific tenure, and it was such a tenure where Celine very purposefully changed its DNA with Phoebe bringing in this whole era where just her name was reminiscent of the brand and vice versa. So it's always interesting coming at it. How social media responds to it is increasingly important, and I think you can see they think about that, LVMH and Kering, because they always make the designers design a terrible shoe with the brand logo on it. We had it in this collection, like a Celine shoe with the Celine like down the crux of the shoe. It was, you know, it felt slightly out of place. And of course we got our logo jumper as well, which is obviously made to be digestible so that people can purchase it. Also the brand has that recognition.
Yeah.
But it's something that takes time. I wasn't a huge fan, but the more I look at it, the more I can see that there are virtues in and of itself in the separates.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just the styling.
Eilidh, what are your thoughts on this idea of being allowed to hate something or to not enjoy it? Because I think there is a wonderful kindness coming across in us, almost understanding that there are so many factors at play now. It's not just one person's fault. As much as fashion has created this mentor-mentee, like singular person thing, ultimately when things fail or when things are good, it's a whole team effort. But I wonder what your thoughts were on kind of, this idea of actually us being allowed to maybe not like it.
I think, so with debuts, I often really hate them. I really feel like there's often no direction. They're trying things out. They're seeing what sticks. And you're getting this here, but what I think Michael Ryder has done is made it feel like it's deliberate, which I think is really, really interesting. So you have, I kind of like tailored almost like 20 culotte, and then you have like, I don't know if this is actually the running order, but then you'll have like a beautiful ball gown with a kind of cropped tuxedo jacket. And they don't live in the same world to me, but they seem, it seems like he's playing with the idea of having to do this for a debut, which I think is pretty interesting.
Well, the other thing that was so staggering is that, they're not ghosts in the room as such, but there is a kind of real sense of, because when Hedi, for example, in 2018, when he joined Celine, said, at Celine, the weight of the past is not as strong as Dior and Saint Laurent, where he was before. We can break free of it more easily, which is, of course, not now the case for Michael Ryder. But I think what was so wonderful and joyous about Hedi's period, particularly his first show, and also Phoebe's, is this sense of like neck break shock, that sort of like, oh, what? This is totally new. And I think I rather, naively, romantically needed that to happen, and it didn't for me here. And I guess for me that felt very indicative of where LVMH as a kind of group are at and where the world is at. This kind of sense of things just needed to be much clearer, much more digestible, much more. A lot of people have commented on the amount of accessories, for example. A lot of people have commented on the styling and almost kind of accused Brian Malloy of over-styling perhaps this collection, which I think is, I understand where that criticism is coming from, but most of this is styling, and that's very valuable. But I wondered kind of what your thoughts were, on this idea of it maybe not being a shock or a jolt. Were any of you shocked or jolted into this? Oh, this is new.
My shock was that it was... my shock that there was nothing new about it.
Yes.
And it felt very zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And it feels like what we see people wearing on the street right now, like very fashionable people, and also the brands that we love right now, who I won't name drop because I don't know who's watching.
Your mum, parents are watching.
No, I think, I'm not gonna create parallels between very successful brands right now and this in such a space. I think that was a very surprising thing for me.
But those parallels exist, though, don't they? They're sort of impossible to avoid. I understand why naming them would be challenging, but actually I think everybody is kind of going... I'm seeing so many people take J.W. Anderson's kind of Dior debut and put them side by side, and, oh, look at this, there's a kind of a neck moment, or this kind of... Often they're quite trite things, but I think there is a real sense now of designers wanting to sort of maybe speak the same language. There's this kind of group think that's perhaps a lot more prevalent today than it ever used to be. But maybe that feels, Harry, maybe that feels appropriate?
I think because we have so much now in fashion, so many runways since like forever, it seems, it's so hard to create something fresh that we're talking about, this fresh feeling. And I'm like the biggest advocate for being like, that's Helmut Lang, that's Margaret, like that is something that I do a lot. But I think for me, I felt like there was a bit of a freshness to this collection. There was the skinniness of Hedi, and then there was the shapes and the colors of Phoebe, but there was a difference there. It didn't feel like a straight rip, which is like, I'm the first person to go in and go, that's directly referenced. And yeah, I felt like that there were things taken, and he was, probably mulling it over with his team, and he managed to regurgitate something that felt slightly different, which is really, excuse my French, bloody hard to do. And yeah, there's obviously, it's a safe show, because you can't go into a house like Celine and go, boom, like throw giant shapes down the runway and expect people to be like, that's interesting, because people be like, that's silly. He's made a collection here that does feel like, yeah, there's references, and there's his opinion through that reference as well, which feels quite nice.
Nicole, what did you feel like Celine needed to be, or what does it need to be in 2025, or actually 2026, which is the season we're talking about here? What, as a brand, as a collection, as a proposition, what do you think it needs to say?
That's a really big question, but I really enjoyed that, because I was just talking about this earlier, and there is this great quote from Nina Simone where she says there is an artist's duty to reflect the times. And I think the time that we're experiencing right now has a lot of shift in direction, in leadership, and luxury fashion is definitely finding itself in a position of economic change and hardship. I think what he needed to prove is that Celine can be commercially savvy. I think, as we've discussed, there is a lot of respecting those house codes that have been, tried and true and enjoyed by the Celine audience, and understanding how they can be involved, but also done in a fresh, kind of modern twist, was the only thing that he needed from this debut collection. And I think he was able to perhaps execute that quite flawlessly. And ultimately, there is also a masterclass in restraint here, where I think he said something around like, I want to make sure that this is respecting and honoring the house codes and like the heritage and legacy of this brand, because I will build on it. It's all about patience. We've seen short-lived tenures happen before, and big conglomerates have suffered because of it. I think LVMH really needed Michael to show to them that I will get to that point, but right now it's all about that foundation, and I think that's what the luxury consumer wants to experiment as well.
What did you think, can we go back to that, Christina? I wondered what anybody else thought of, so this is the letter, we should call it, that's released at the show and post-show with the images to journalists as a sort of statement, if you like, of intent. A lot of brands kind of favour something slightly more detailed, with talking about seasonal themes and things they might have looked at, things they might have developed, but there is a new fashion for these kinds of personal letters, and designers who often have these ideas around wardrobing and around a lifestyle rather than a seasonal proposition often do this. I wonder what you all thought of this statement, because for me it felt a little bit sort of nothingy. It felt very bit generic, and sort of these are, I guess my issue with this whole thing is that I just was rolling my eyes constantly, and all of the reviews and everything everyone said, no one is really saying anything. And I think sometimes perhaps, we're victim to this too, where we all kind of gather in a space like this and we chat for 45 minutes, but actually what kind of content do our words really have? And that's the kind of frustration that I've been faced with often. I'm in a space of education, so quite often students will say something, but they're actually saying nothing at all. So for me, I felt the statement feels incredibly sort of wishy-washy. It can be torn apart in seconds. It doesn't really commit to anything, and that's kind of where I get really annoyed, because I just think there's too much at stake. There's too much money. My attention, the attention economy, you have it, but I'm not getting much back.
It just seems like it's an opinion that's been said 1,000 times already. It's like, of course we want clothes to wear and live in. Like, that's kind of what we do as humans. So yeah, it feels a bit, like you said, wishy-washy.
And again, perhaps I'm kind of reading too much into it, but that is kind of our job, my job in particular. But Eilidh, what were you going to say?
I think, pardon me, my throat is very, very weird today. I'm kind of obsessed with it.
Yeah?
Because I feel like I was thinking about this on the way here, and Michael Ryder is, this person who we know is behind the scenes at Celine and then took over Polo Ralph Lauren, which, I never looked at that. I'm sorry, I didn't. Who did? And now we have him at the helm of Celine. Hedi Slimane just left, one of the most iconic designers of this century, and huge effect on fashion. And you see it now in youth culture, him coming back has had such a massive effect on youth culture and music and so much. And then you have this guy, and everyone, when he was announced, everyone was like, who the hell is that? And he has this press release is him making a statement, but he's not making a statement. He's I think he's deliberately making it nothingy.
Yes.
Because, a debut is such an insane thing to do, particularly when no one knows who you are. You've given 3 quotes to the press in the past. Yeah, I think, I don't know, there's something about it that's genius to me.
I think Barry Pearce, writing for One Granary, actually said that it was almost like Michael was in witness protection because it was so hard to find anything out about him.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, also wonderful because, there is this kind of sense of us now looking at the people behind the scenes, and there have been articles, maybe that was also One Granary, about should we be paying more attention to the design teams because a lot of the hires are coming from internally, 100%. Which is good, but also the cynical part of me means that, it's coming in because, as you say, Michael knows Celine, but he also knows all of the kind of pressures that come with that job. He knows all of the kind of KPIs, if you like, that he has to hit. So there's something slightly kind of cynical, I think, about that in a way. But I think as a statement, I guess it's totally valid for somebody to want to have a kind of soft entrance, if you like, into this very, very big role. But I think for me, the world in the way that it is, as Nicole was touching upon briefly, I don't know if this is the time for fashion to be so sort of conservative and so subservient to what essentially is just capitalism here, And again, this is not a lecture about capitalism because, hey, we all love a new shoe. But the idea here that this just felt like stuff to me. I think I felt really overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that I was going to see in Celine airport shops. And that made me feel quite sad. It's beautiful stuff, beautifully put together, but I think it felt a little bit empty, perhaps, and maybe that's the bit that the emotion, the first look that most people had to it, where they were like, "Oh, I'm not sure about this," but obviously we are willing to look at it again. But what do you think?
Is Celine a brand that you go for to get emotionally ripped apart? I don't know if it ever.
No.
I don't think it's ever been that brand.
Yeah.
Necessarily. No. I think it is a luxury brand that makes great clothes.
Sure.
But it's not something I look at to go, I don't look at it to evoke severe emotion.
Yeah.
I think for women under the Phoebe Philo it was.
Yeah.
I think it was quite an evocative brand under Phoebe. I think it did feel like it fulfilled a purpose where houses were designing for women but helmed by men.
I think it was because it was the first time since Margiela where we had really good clothes for women, so it felt like, whoa, this is the first time we've had that in a long time. Whereas we've kind of had a follow-on from that for quite a while, so this does not feel like it's an impact, but there's really good clothes going down the runway here. But Celine is not a brand that I would look for to get an emotional response from.
Totally fair.
I was having a conversation yesterday with my friend who actually worked with Michael at Celine, and I was just trying to get a read on what this person, who I won't gender or name, thought, and what he was like as a person. And this person was he's really clever. He was kind of a lot of the brains behind a lot of stuff with Phoebe.
Yeah.
And this is all deliberate. This is all measured. This is all deliberate. 100%. Hence why I think the saying nothing thing is so huh. And then when I start looking at that, I'm rich people dress badly these days. We all know that. I don't know, I think maybe I can't follow this thought through, but I'm just a perfectly tailored coat that, like, you know, has shoulders like that. Like, okay, you're going to see it on, like, a banker potentially, or a banker's wife. Isn't that okay?
Isn't
To
that
make
enough?
beautiful clothes for, like, rich people?
I guess, though, one of you might have mentioned, maybe it was you, that lots of people make beautiful clothes and we see them a lot. I guess, again, I'm thinking about it in context of all the other shows, all the other clothes, all the other things that we see. I think that's what I mean, is that it just feels like more things.
But it fulfills a purpose. For LVMH, it fulfills that purpose. Sales are lacking in mainland China and in the Middle East. This is a collection that will sell and increase very well, not only in its aesthetic, but also it's a very modest collection in terms of its showcasing of skin.
Yeah.
It will hit with those consumer demographics where they have been lacking over specifically the last 2 years. I mean, amongst the other debuts, obviously you have Jonathan Anderson coming out at Dior, and you've obviously just had Dries kind of settle into itself. It fulfills the purpose for LVMH of being that gentle introduction, which markets will warm to, which hopefully will have some good performance, deliver decent capital, and then maybe he can have a bit of creative or intellectual flair for the next couple of collections. I mean, in and of itself, he went to Brown. He's a very well-liked man, very learned man in the industry. I think it made sense for what you expected of him, that kind of oscillation between Americana and a Parisian chic. But was it exciting? Not particularly, but I do think it will sell.
I think there's something to be said about self-preservation here as well. I mean, we all saw what happened at the very short-lived tenure at Gucci. And that was, again, somebody who had been behind the scenes and understood the house and the house codes and decided to just go at it. And, you know, to your point, to try to, like, strive some type of emotional response. And really tried and really went for it and felt quite hard on, you know, on the response, commercially specifically. So I think undoubtedly that would make anybody in Michael's position quite nervous to, you know, follow into the same sort of pattern. And, you know, there were some bold statements made on that runway, but again, it felt safe because of perhaps of what we've observed and experienced in the past few years. And in his defense, I think he's playing a very strategic game. And I mean, to everybody's point, I think there is a lot more to be shown, but this was intentional and it felt intentional. I think we can all collectively agree that whether you like it or not, it felt calculated.
I think with that sense of kind of calculation and production and I guess how it was so schooled in being right and correct, how correct this was. I found it really interesting that actually now, and I don't know whether this is a kind of trend, but you can all tell me if you've noticed, but the comments on the Instagram were turned off. And I found that, because that was the place that I loved hanging out, because that's actually where you get to see all sorts of ideas, and maybe not all of them are brilliant, but you do really get a kind of temperature check of like what's happening. Now some of them seem to be, or maybe they've turned them on.
The announcements, they're still off. I quite like it, actually. I quite like the idea of being able to just focus purely on a collection initially.
Really?
Sometimes I really enjoy it. I love it when they turn them off on a live stream occasionally as well.
Wow.
I want to hear I want to hear what I'm thinking.
Sure.
I'm there with you, to be honest.
Yeah, there's something about just existing in this echo chamber of, like, hearing people say what you're already thinking, or hearing people. I really like the idea of having that, seeing like almost the virginity of a collection.
Okay.
Just seeing it completely unadulterated, seeing it completely unimpacted. It's so interesting. Also then giving a few people to marinate afterwards, and how many people come round to a collection that a lot of people have said are good, which you didn't think was good, and still trying to hold on to your own sense of self. Because obviously everyone says it's great on social media because a lot of the people we follow are advertisers. So
Yeah.
there's an obligation by them, there's a commercial obligation to not destroy the collection, unless you're reading Vanessa Friedman or Robin Givhan, for example.
Well, it also says a lot about how Instagram has changed to become basically Tumblr. You know, it's a photographic platform where people put their work out, and even in terms of engaging with it or the responses, it doesn't really seem the algorithm doesn't really seem to need.
The collection wasn't made for Instagram, was it? So they obviously have to put out these images to kind of give a new direction. And it's interesting that they put out the images before the collection even came out, which was just like, this is where we're at. We're not changing our mind after the collection's out. We're not shooting the campaign after the collection's out. We've already shot it. This is what we're doing. So like you're saying, this intention is super clear that they already know where they're going. They're probably already, set their shop up for the next collection and are kind of working on that already. So, it's made for Celine. It's made for the runway. It's not made for Instagram. So turning the comments off, it's a very minor thing, but it does have a huge impact on.
Yeah, I just guess that for me, it kind of gives the sort of sense that there's more control being reined in, and I guess this is the bit that I'm finding quite suffocating, is that there's so much content too. Like there's an awful lot of hype around these things, and I found myself really having to hide people's stories and put unfollow people, and these are people that I like and respect, but they've just become these inane kind of puppets for these brands, and I understand why, but it's becoming increasingly like a personal issue that I have to sort of stop it coming to me. I have to kind of make that barrier, and I find that really, it just feels like there's a huge change happening in fashion.
From the invite onwards now.
Oh my God.
The invites are, I remember 5 years ago, none of the invites were crazy. Even for couture, we didn't get mental invites, whereas now a scarf, necklaces, like ephemera from the house. You're getting real things, a spoon. I remember when Balenciaga bought everyone like stuff from eBay, and we all just had like random things in our hotel room. It was just odd. It's lovely, but the content starts now literally from before the show.
Yeah.
We have such an overlap, such a massive turnover as well of shows.
I think brands have always done invites, but I just think Instagram is it's just taking over. So people want to show that, We've had great invites.
Yeah, but not to the scale we're getting now.
Yeah. Not the kind of sculptural. Basically, it's like ephemera now. It's not just a piece of card.
The silver spoon for Margiela has been done before.
Yeah.
Margiela's always done it.
Yeah. So.
But Jonathan obviously brought that to Dior because under Kim's tenure, it was always the same format of a card in a kind of zip case canvas hold-all. And now, of course, he brought out the ceramic plate. So there is this kind of real understanding, I guess, that people will keep that and talk about it in more ways. And again, I'm not begrudging any of those things, but I think it says an awful lot when a collection is now not just about the clothing, it's about all the bits surrounding it. And that just means the conversation is kind of circulating in our own midst for much longer, perhaps, than it needs to be also. That's the thing, is that this is clearly for a certain type of person, but I wondered who you all thought this new Celine customer, is it even a new customer?
I don't think it's a new customer, no. I think a lot of the collection is perhaps a pastiche of things that we've seen before. And in a way, it's repetitive. It focuses on like legacy items that we've seen time and time again. It focuses on reboots of commercial successes. But what I will say is the stylistic choice of how they've been presented to us is new. So perhaps not intentionally, they will attract a new consumer, but I don't think that necessarily was top of mind for them. I think right now, as we all discussed, for LVMH, it's kind of, let's just retain the consumer because the show voice is as small as is.
Yeah.
And if this first collection is just about that, then so be it.
Because at LVMH's annual general meeting in April last year, Bernard Arnault, who's the chief executive, said Celine is chic, hip, sexy fashion for young people, even if the prices are what they are, and it works. Now, obviously, this was kind of when Hedi was still at the helm, but I wondered kind of how you thought that might have changed. And just to kind of give you the other side of that, when Phoebe was at Celine, the sense was working women who wanted to look pulled together in a flash with a minimalist aesthetic that was cozy and comforting. So those two were quite opposing in lots of different ways. But I wondered kind of if you thought that this is a third kind of audience, or is it a meeting of the two, as Nicole's just suggested, Benji?
I think it's a marrying of the two. I think Michael Ryder has this oscillation between various worlds. He is a very interesting designer in and of itself. Doing working with Nicole Brixi, then working with Phoebe Philo, then also coming back to then Polo Ralph Lauren, then back to Celine, being an American in Paris. It's this constant oscillation between worlds. And I feel like for this first collection, because Celine isn't an eponymous house in the same way someone like a Christian Dior is, where you have this massive backlog, but also this looming founder figure who exists far beyond their death. Same with like Cristobal Balenciaga, etc. He kind of needs to find his way a bit. And it makes sense to hit that middle note. And it does kind of feel like if an Hedi Slimane collection and a Phoebe Philo collection had a child. We've got like the cinched waists and the femininity of silhouette of Phoebe Philo. We've got the mixture of color. They did like Look 46 or something, was the gorgeous like scarves melded into the shirts, and it's very Phoebe Philo. And then we have very that one, Look 46, there we go. I was on the money. That's very Phoebe to me. And then we also have like the very Hedi Slimane with the tight trousers, the like little boys' choir shoes, the branded T-shirts, even the simplicity of the cut of some of the dresses. So it's interesting to see a designer who doesn't feel like they need to come in and immediately reverse everything and change an entire code of a house. I mean, how many annoyed, wealthy consumers out there must be so many over the last 10 years, who bought 5 million quid's worth of Alessandro Michele's Gucci, and then the next day they were buying polo shirts by Sabato De Sarno. Do you know what I mean? That constant, yes, of course, that constant change. It's the same with like Louis Vuitton, etc. So there's something quite nice about this bedding in period. Like you were talking about where, is it about making that radical statement? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's about getting to know the atelier, getting to know your consumer, honing your codes and your techniques, and then kind of going from there. Maybe we're entering the era of the designer long living again, and not being that massive switch, only lasting a couple of years and then moving on.
I hope so.
So do I. It'd be nice.
Yeah.
What did you all think? Because the styling has been mentioned by lots and lots of reviewers and online. How do you all feel about the styling and the presence of a stylist so obviously within a collection?
I think it's inescapable at this point. I don't think you're going to get a fashion industry or a fashion week where there is not the voice of a stylist in a show. They're such an integral part to the design process now. They like come in and cut entire looks sometimes. I have no issue with it. I mean, what I do take issue with is when the collection then starts feeling like the stylist's kind of editorial work. I think that can be difficult when you notice it with like some particular people. But this in particular, it's extremely styled, but that's because you're working with pieces that, are hopefully going to be commercially successful, like a beautiful T-shirt, a beautiful pair of tailored trousers.
Yeah.
If you don't style it up, then no one looks at it.
I didn't mind that at all, but I was interested that so many people felt that it was kind of a bit too much. But I mean, what did you think?
I don't think it was too much. I think there's a really wide variety of styling techniques put into the collection. That there are looks where it's a dress and a shoe. And then there's a jacket that's completely folded, the cuffs are out, and it's great. So I think to have that, like this like tailored jacket here with the polo tucked in, it's a styled look, but you wouldn't say that he's fully over-styled it. It's kind of someone just thrown it on and done the cuffs and walked out of the house. But then there are looks in there that, they're heavily styled, but that's what you need to show the customer. You need to show people these clothes can be boring, and they can also be really extravagant and really fun. So I think Brian's done a great job. I think he's a great stylist. I think it's pretty obvious.
Nicole, is there something that perhaps the industry might need to do to kind of make the stylist and to honour almost how important they are, to kind of give them a bit more of the spotlight than they currently get? Because it is kind of common practice, particularly for Paris and Milan shows, for stylists to not get a credit on the show notes, which is not common practice in London at all. And I think that's because we have such a huge magazine culture, and that, like, for the last, since IDs and The Face and from the 80s, that was really normal, that stylists was kind of a huge part of how fashion was made here. Whereas at this level, they tend not to really get any credit whatsoever. I only found out from reading Cathy Horan's review of The Cut, and occasionally you can see when model agents have tagged the models, they sometimes kind of tag in the stylist, so that's a pro tip to try and find out who styled a show if it matters to you. But do you think there is there's a need for us maybe to think about that more, talk about it more? Is that just another thing for us to kind of create problems with?
I know, it's an industry-wide epidemic, the lack of accreditation across all sectors.
Yeah.
Styling, it's no different to that. I think there is so much work that needs to be done to make sure that all of these behind-the-scenes people are getting the recognition that they deserve. Even for me, I work in branded content, commercial creative branded content, and whenever my campaigns go live, there is never that sub of creative strategy behind it. It's an art director, it's a photographer, videographer. There is no stylist, there is no makeup artist sometimes, it's an industry-wide epidemic. I think that it's kind of hard to say what we can do to change because there's so many things that we've tried and tested throughout the years, but it doesn't seem to stick. I think what we have to keep saying is we just have to keep having these conversations, even just like the four of us here today, 5, mentioning that as something that's happening right now brings awareness to it, and not letting the fact that it keeps happening just kind of, get it by and just allow it to continue happening.
I don't think it's a lack of accreditation. I think some stylists actually don't want their name plastered over a collection. I know some stylists personally who work with some of these big brands, and they've had conversations with them. I'm like, I didn't know you did that. He's like, yeah, I don't really need my name on this. And it's a big job. It's like they're not doing it for the Instagram tag. They're doing it because they love styling clothes on people, and they love to see it go down a lookbook, and they love to see people go, oh, that look was amazingly styled, and then they have to find it. It's not. I don't think it's a lack of credit. If Brian Molly wanted to be tagged and credited on this, he could say, I want to be tagged and credited on this. And he would have been put all over it. But he probably was just like, wow, I don't really.
I guess my comment is more from an educational point of view. You kind of want there to be this, just so that everybody kind of knows that that's happening. But maybe you're right. That,
I think we all know that
kind of
already, though. Yeah.
I think there's also something to be said about like setting the precedent, because perhaps you might not be wanting to be seen in that capacity, but that kind of sets the tone for people that do.
Yeah.
And when you're at this like level and there's so much attention to you, even if that's not your preferred choice, I think it kind of paves the way for people that do want to be seen in that capacity. So I don't know if there's some responsibility there that I think people need to take in terms of like, perhaps that's not my thing, but I think setting the tone for everybody else is also part of my job.
Yeah. But I also just think the world is now increasingly more and more difficult for those of us that want to just remain behind the scenes. Like that's near on impossible now. And I think that's the kind of interesting, to kind of full circle moment about the lack of digital footprint for Michael online. Is that interesting? It would be nice for us to kind of maybe see how that evolves over time, and hopefully he can maintain some of that privacy. Let's switch now to see if we have any audience questions. Stella.
One from the audience. Why do industry people treat Celine like it's holy? It feels like no one can do right after Phoebe.
Gagged.
I agree.
Gagged. Kind of gagged.
Why is it such a why is Phoebe's era, perhaps at Celine, so revered, and do we just need to move on? Considering that she now has her own line.
I have a hot take about this. I think it's the fact that we're still lacking a lot of really instantly recognizable female creative directors. And to be completely honest, I think she kind of was one of a kind in that sense. Like in a time where there is not much diversity in the industry, she really set the precedent of that postmodern working woman, and kind of inspired a whole generation of creative directors and women working fashion to pursue something similar to what she achieved. And it's quite hard then to follow up from that.
Eilidh, do you think the fixation on her era has something to do with this kind of a kind of feminism, if you like?
I think there is something to that for sure. I also think that she is a designer who designs in a really specific way, where, she'll take, or her design team will take, a pair of, let's say, jodhpurs from the 1930s, and will then create a trouser from those, and they look nothing like this pair of jodhpurs. But there's some detail, there's some character in them that feels like these jodhpurs. But they're so far away from them, they just look like a pair of trousers. But there's something in those clothes that not many people can actually do, which is why if you worked at Celine under Phoebe, you could get a job anywhere. And why so many of the people who worked under her now have these creative directorships. And I think we haven't seen that being realized at any other brand. yet.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Fingers crossed.
She designed for an era of femininity that fashion so often doesn't like to acknowledge, which is like kind of 35 to 55 for women to wear those clothes and live in those clothes and exist in those clothes as someone who was reflective of that. You know, she's a mum, and she's also a very, very well sort of qualified designer from her tenure at Chloe to just her personal projects. She really designed clothes which women wanted to wear and wanted to emulate within that age demographic, where it wasn't trying to be representative of you'll look younger in this, or you'll look more statured in this, or people will respect you in this. She was designing as a woman from the perspective of clothes that she wanted to wear for herself. So rare do we get designers in that. I mean, Hedi Slimane can make beautiful dresses, but he's not wearing them. Jean-Baptiste Valli can make gorgeous gowns, but he's not getting married in them. There's something really specially unique about Celine, her era.
I think also to add to that, like, it makes a particular type of woman feel a particular type of way. I know a very well-known fashion editor who got loads of old Celine at a sample sale or something, and credits that Celine as the thing that drove her career.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but I get it. It's like, yeah, you sometimes put certain clothes on.
So the position that Celine has, from the question, it's warranted as this kind of
I think so, yeah.
powerful tool. Do we think it would be that powerful under Michael? Times have also changed. I think we have to acknowledge that, right? Phoebe's time is not now, so she was working blissfully before all the garbage we have to look at online all the time, so she didn't have to worry about that as much.
I don't think you'll ever get the same feeling again, obviously. It's like saying, oh, do you think there's going to be another Margiela? There won't be another Margiela, there won't be another Phoebe. As a few other names you could throw in the hat. And I think that that's something that we need to move on from a little bit. And it's Celine is a great brand. They obviously have an idea of fashion and they know how to make good clothes, and they've obviously chosen this guy for a reason. So I think, maybe it is a bit of a holy brand, because it's something, you see the name, you recognize it, you have so many thoughts about it straight away. Whether it's everyone's holy brand, I don't think so, but for the most part, for sure, to answer the question that they asked.
Any more?
How much do expectations get in the way when assessing a debut collection?
What was that again?
How much do expectations get in the way when assessing a debut?
Too much.
I mean,
who's looking at it.
Yeah, I always think they're going to be not very good, so...
Yeah.
You always going low?
Yeah, I'm like, I think it's going to be a mess. And then it usually is a mess, but then, like I said, I was like, it's an organized mess. It's kind of amazing. I don't know about you guys.
No, I agree. I feel like I say this every time we do a panel, actually. It's like the first 3 collections are kind of write-offs. Like, you're settling in. So I think people forget that the settling in process isn't just the design process. For some of these designers, it's relocating country, it's relocating their families, it's learning another language, it's learning a whole atelier, which might be 60 to 100 people. It's settling into also having Bernard Arnault have your phone number and call you at 5 a.m.
WhatsApp.
You know, all of those things. McQueen described it really well when he joined Givenchy. Obviously, Galliano had joined Givenchy before him, had made it gorgeous, and then went on to Dior. But Lee had such a candid perspective on it, of just being like, this has completely changed my life, and also completely changed who I am in terms of where I am in life. And it's so true, I think we forget that sometimes. These people have to completely change their lives to make these collections. They also then have the expectation of both the consumer, the team, the journalists. You know, there's a million scary people sat in those seats who you respect as well. People like, I mean, earlier there was an article by Penny Martin. Like people, journalists like that who you know are genuinely incredible writers. Vanessa Friedman, Robin Gavan, Lisa Armstrong. The weight of it must be massive. So give them 3 collections, settle in, and then we kind of start to see the excellence a bit more.
Any others?
We have one more. Can we pull any accents or motifs from this show?
Any accents or motifs in the show?
Yeah. Can we pull them so far?
So what do we think the references were? What
Equestrian, very equestrian.
Equestrian.
Which I love the trousers, were very equestrian. The velour, like strappy trousers, kind of bondagey as well a little bit, which was quite nice. The collars like popped up again, like quite Ivy League.
Yes.
Felt really like quite Americana in a very like soft, subtle way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the rugby shirts as well. I mean, it's all.
His trousers are really good on the right.
There's a lot of Americana in it for sure.
Yeah, old sportswear.
Yeah, the sportswear.
A lot of old sportswear.
There's also a few nods to my favourite era of Celine, which is Michael Kors is Celine, which is not a fashionable thing to say, but I'm saying it on the record.
Say it.
Because I think, again, that was one of my questions, and thank you for all of your questions, is how significant is Michael's American heritage to this? Because again, it's something people have picked up on. Obviously, previously Michael Kors, an American, brought this kind of very American sort of minimalist evening wear glamour to the label that his own label kind of still enjoys. And I wondered kind of, because his time at Polo Ralph Lauren, directing the women's wear, do we think that culture there is an influence here, and how might that unfold, Eilidh?
I think it's in the air. I think, like, you know, American vintage and kind of like early 20th sportswear is everywhere. And I don't think him being American has a particular influence on that. Obviously, Polo Ralph Lauren is very American.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I'm
Because
not
it
sure.
comes up with Daniel Schiaparelli too, like an American in Paris. Like there's a kind of hardness, I think, to often how American designers interpret this idea of Frenchness. There's a sort of, it's kind of done with a Sharpie rather than a kind of...
I think the switch works quite well. Like when Raf went to Calvin, it was really good. Like they're the other way, so it's nice to see them come over here as well and see what they do. You know.
Yeah, I think this just actually reminds me of something I saw that Sydney Toledo said from LVMH, where she described Michael Celine as he understands the Parisian, but he most importantly understands the international Parisian. So I think there's very much like, again, it's intentional, the decision to have him come to the Maison, because that's the kind of audience they want to attract. They don't want to just feel like exclusionary. They want to make sure that it's appealing to a wider global audience as well. And having an American come to this and be the one to like wave the flag for it just kind of makes sense, and it feels like the perfect marriage.
I think we're kind of past now the elitism of French houses needing to stay French or Italian houses need to stay Italian and vice versa. You know, since designers like, I mean, Michael Kors joined, 1997, Celine, but we also had Marc Jacobs at Louis Vuitton, all these great debuts. And again, same with Lee McQueen and John Galliano joining Givenchy and Dior. This idea, I think, of us needing to preserve these codes has slipped now in a positive way, because fashion isn't a singular industry. It's not a domestic industry anymore. It has to be a global industry to be able to sustain the weight of these like behemoths of conglomerates, for better or for worse. So it's nice to see the cross-pollination. I mean, personally, I like Americana. I think it's wearable.
I absolutely love it. I think it's
enjoyable. It's really lovely to see clothes that you can wear sometimes as well. So it's nice, because we all go to shows sometimes where you think, I'm not going to be able to fucking fit into that, am I? So it's nice to see some pieces where you're like, okay, cool, yeah. I can fit into that.
Of that famous thing that Karl Lagerfeld said about Hedi's Celine, was that he had to lose 92 pounds and drink only Diet Coke to fit in the clothes. So yeah, I think we won't be doing any of that. It feels wearable, it feels attainable, which is great. And that's the beauty of, I guess.
It doesn't feel Ozempic era at all.
It doesn't.
At all, no. Whereas Eddie's, after a while, I think it did. I mean, the jumpsuit's skinny.
The jumpsuit was...
But, you know, the wide leg trousers, the voluminous coats, it didn't feel
Ozempic era. Who does Ozempic couture well?
I've never even heard that before.
Exactly.
Making content now.
Couture, I feel like less is less Ozempic-y.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, and plead the fifth. But I'm like, who have I done ads for recently? No, I'm joking. I think, obviously, Hedi Slimane was the ultimate. I was watching Anna Wintour talk about kind of the warrior of heroin chic recently. You think about, like, Kate Moss's first sort of editorial in The Face, when everyone started talking about heroin chic. I do think Hedi glamorized that. I do think he glamorized very young, very, very skinny boys. And my friends who are cast in his shows are tiny. I mean, tiny. Like, one of my waist is like 5 of their waists. Like, these are tiny people. So it's nice to see designers walk away from that a little bit. I mean, Saint Laurent as well, Anthony Vaccarello, I feel like has really grown up over the last like 5 seasons. I really feel like he's really matured Saint Laurent into not being this constant mirror of Celine, Saint Laurent being able to just like swap them around and not know which was which.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of broke it, I say, tentatively.
Okay, we've broken Zemi Couture.
Have we?
You just have.
I think maybe in fashion proper, yeah, but I think it's gonna keep going, and the kids are gonna keep going. Yeah, like it's not over yet.
It's not over.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave it on a more positive note, and I like this idea of the international Parisian. So let's think about
I'd love to be
him or her or them and what they might want to look like. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for your views. Let's carry on having the conversation online and underneath this video in YouTube. And we'll see you again here at Show Studio for the next one. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.